Should we as readers give the authors the benefit of the doubt? Should we as commentators and critics try to appease the feelings of authors? I've been getting a lot of comments recently on a video I put out about rating books. Thank you so much for the love on that video and all of the comments. It has really informed the way that I rate books going forward, hearing from you and how you rate things, so I really appreciate that. But on that video, I have been receiving a lot of comments from people who say that they find it incredibly difficult to be critical of work because of the difficulty of writing. And I wanted to talk through that a little bit. I wanted to ask these questions of should we give the authors the benefit of the doubt because of how difficult the craft is. I jotted down a bit of an outline so that this isn't just stream of consciousness. So let's start with point one, which is at its face, writing is hard. One of my favorite quotes from Hemingway, one of my favorite authors, is there's nothing to writing. All you do is sit down at a typewriter and bleed. Now, is this actually a Hemingway quote? I'm not 100% sure. We can never really tell. You know, anything you read on the internet is true, quoted to Abraham Lincoln, that type of stuff. But I like to think that it's Hemingway because you can really feel him pouring himself out in a lot of his work. Needless to say, writing is one of the most difficult artistic pursuits. I have found in the past that sitting in front of the blank page, now we're talking about screenplays more so than novels for me specifically, is one of the more daunting things that I have ever done in my life, especially when you know that something like this is going to be consumed. Now for me, this was in class. I went to film school, and in my writing classes, I knew that I was writing to a sympathetic audience. My classmates, my teachers, they were there to help me get better. And even then, I found the difficulty to be so daunting that I completely shifted gears and moved from writing to cinematography. I also enjoy the camera a little bit more, but that's not for this video. So, I say that to say that I truly understand how difficult it is to pour yourself out in a personal form of art, much like writing, and receive negative feedback. I totally understand that, but I still think that it is incredibly important. And I also think that just because the medium is difficult, that does not preclude people from commenting and criticizing. I am incredibly sympathetic to the idea that after you read an 800, 900,000 page book, and you think to yourself, this must have been so incredibly difficult to write, I don't feel adequate to the task of giving it a star rating, of writing a review, of making a video. I'm totally sympathetic to that. I have run into that process in my mind with this channel in the 8 months that I've been doing this. I have finished a couple books that I really didn't love, but I realized and recognized the difficulty in writing that and said to myself, I'll bump it up a half star or a star just because it must have been really hard to get through it. And I think that that is disingenuous, and I have actively tried to work against that. And throughout this video, hopefully I can explain my process to you and explain to you the reasons why. That moves us to point number two. Criticism is not a personal attack. This is probably the core thesis of my argument here today. I think that in the year of our Lord 2025, in the modern book, film, television landscape in which we live, it has never been easier to gain access to the author, to the director, to the writer. And because of that fact, because of social media, because of YouTube, because of the way that our world has shrunk, we now feel that the veil between author and consumer is so thin that criticism is looked at by a lot of people online as a personal attack on the author's character or the author as a person rather than what it actually is, which is a critical look at the piece of art. On this channel, I subscribe to a ton of book content. So as I open up my home page on YouTube, I am inundated with authors, not just critics or booktubers, but authors. You can click through and see Brandon Sanderson's thought process on how he is writing things. There are podcasts with authors. There are long form pieces where we hear authors' intent. We hear what the author was actually going for with a piece. Now that is incredibly useful, and I love the fact that we can get an idea of what the author was actually going for, what their intent was. But when we hear about the intent of something, that makes the execution of something a little bit muddy. So we as reviewers, or we as just people who want to talk about books, because I wouldn't say that I'm a critic, I'm not formally trained in literary criticism. I'm just some dude who talks about books on the internet, but I try to do it in good faith always. And so when I hear about the intent behind something, I then can look at the piece, and while the execution may not have been perfect, I can say to myself, oh, well, I know what they were going for. So although it didn't come through on the page, I know what they were going for, so I can soften my criticism of it. And I think that that does a disservice. At the end of the day, all that we really have as readers is the finished book. Now, we do have interviews and podcasts and YouTube videos, but that is secondary to the piece of work, in my opinion. We have to judge what's on the page. Okay, so I'm editing right now, as you can tell. I feel like I missed one important aspect of the veil between author and reader, and that is personal experience or personal motivation. I think we are in a world where we can understand why an author would choose to write about a specific topic, and that can also color our review. Let's say it's a book about child illness, right? And the author has specifically dealt with the illness of their child. Now, knowing that fact and knowing how difficult it was for the author through Instagram posts, through podcast interviews, and then reading the book that is not specifically about, I'm not saying it's a memoir, but a fiction book that has sickness or illness of a child as a fundamental piece, I, as the reader, may take a softer stance on that storyline because I know how difficult that real world experience was for the author. I can see both sides of this argument. I understand why that's a thing, and I understand that humans are empathy machines, and we want to understand why people go through things and understand how hard it is for people to go through things. But again, I think that there is more value when we are judging books to actually judge what was on the page. So if that section or that storyline or that piece of the novel that's written about the illness of a child is well written, is captivating, gets its message across well through the use of language, through the prose, then totally go for it. And understanding that the author actually had a personal experience, that may enhance it. However, if the prose is not good, if the story is not done well, if it's not written well, if it doesn't actually make you feel anything, we can't give it extra points, in my opinion, just because the author has dealt with something very similar to what they are writing about. That's just my 2 cents. I know that that's difficult because when personal seeps into writing, which I think it should, I think oftentimes authors are writing what they know, what they have felt. I think that's totally fine, but that doesn't really give you a pass for it to not be written well. This is my opinion. I can understand people have differing opinions on this one, but I just wanted to add that part to this whole deal. Okay, back to past me. With every single video that I put out, I want to judge what is on the page. I do not care about the person. I do not care about the personality. I do not care about the intent, or at least I try my best not to, so that I can be as objective as possible. Now, I understand that this is personal preference and that you, as a reader and consumer of fiction or nonfiction, may want to understand more of what the author was trying to get across. You may put a lot of stock in the personality or in the personal trials and travails that the author has gone through. That may impact the way that you read. That's totally fine. I'm not here to take any of that away from you. What I am here to do is to explain to you my process so that hopefully I can stop getting some of these comments, although I'm always down for comments. Go ahead and leave all the comments you want. But hopefully I can open and broaden your mind to a perspective of criticism that is not aimed personally at the author, but instead is focused solely, as much as possible, on the work. Now, you may be asking yourself, why in the world does any of this matter? And that's point number 3. Why does this matter? Why does criticism matter as we continue to lower the veil between author and consumer? Certainly, understanding the author's intent is more important. Well, I don't 100% agree with that. I think, specifically, that art, specifically books and film and television, are made to be consumed. And I would go so far as to say that a book is not finished until it has been read by an audience, until it has been read by a person, until it has been read by someone with a critical eye. Now, we can talk about the editing process and we can talk about beta readers, but I think until it is published and until it is accessible by an audience at large, a book is not finished. That may be controversial, but that is how I feel with art. It is made to be consumed. Unless you are a hermit and you are just writing as an exercise, which is totally fine, but if you are writing for an audience, the book is not done until that audience consumes it and then reflects back what you tried to put in the book, but what the audience is taking away from the book. The author dies at the end of writing. The author is no longer a part of it, in my opinion. This is a school of criticism that you can go back and forth on the philosophical ideas. For me personally, I lean more towards the death of the author. I lean more towards what you as an individual mine and consume out of the piece is more important than what the author's original intent is. There's always going to be a middle ground. We can look at the example of American Psycho. This is a clear satire that has been co-opted and used by some not so savory characters on the internet, to put it mildly, to espouse a lifestyle that is very much going against the intent of the author. In this case, it is clear that the intent of the author matters. And in most cases, it is clear that the intent of the author matters. So we have to ride that line. We have to find that middle, that balance. But that is the process of criticism. That is the process of objectively trying to understand what this book is about. We can find what the author's intent was, but then we can also bring our own personal baggage, our own personal worldview and identity to a piece to try and find what it means for us. So we must marry the objective with the subjective. That is what's so fun about reading, but also what is so difficult about critically reading, which I think we're losing a little bit of. We're kind of just letting things wash over us. We're kind of just going through the motions. At least that's how I used to read. Maybe I shouldn't put these words on you, but for me personally, I was just kind of moving through life, reading books and letting them go in one ear and out the other. And so I wanted to start this channel in an attempt to read more critically. And through some incredible comments by you guys, thank you so much, that process is continuing. And these ideas being brought to the forefront of being harsh on an author has really made me reflect on the way that I read and the way that I create videos. So thank you so much for these comments. Well, even with the list, I felt like this was a little bit of a rambly video. Let me just sum it up with this. I think that we must marry the objective with the subjective, as I said. Bring your own personal baggage, understand as much as you would like to understand about the author, about their intent, but always understand that when we are critiquing, when we are commenting on a piece of work, it is not a personal attack. Try to always remind yourself of that. Did something work or not work for you in a piece? That's fine. Just because the book was 900 pages long and the ending was terrible, in your opinion, that doesn't mean that you have to couch that opinion, that you have to hide that opinion. That is your opinion of which you are entitled to. Now, you are also entitled to getting pushback. Every video that I put out, I encourage comments that are done in good faith about why I am wrong, why you had a different reading of a piece, because I know that my personal perspective is different from people's perspectives. You may find something completely different in a piece of work that I just either ignored or didn't understand, or because of my personal biases, did not drill down into. That is the beauty of community reading. I encourage these comments, but I would also like to ask that you, as you read, start to understand that you must marry the objective with the subjective and try to get to that happy middle where you can make the best of your reading and understand not just what the author was intending, but also what you are bringing to the book and then taking out of the book as a consumer of the piece, as one half of the whole that is author and reader. Well, that's it for today, folks. Hopefully you got something out of this video. Hopefully it made a little bit of sense. Please let me know your thoughts on literary criticism, on YouTube criticism, anything, in what you ate for breakfast. Let me know down in the comments. I'd love to hear it. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you are reading something very, very good. I will see you in the next video.